Welcome. Welcome to all of you, and I welcome our honored guests and friends who are here tonight to the Walt Whitman Birthplace Association 2024 Signature Series, Walt Whitman's Long Island, Then and Now. On behalf of the Board of Trustees, I welcome our speaker today, Mr. Tom Casey. Welcome. And I'd like to welcome our musician, Linda Sussman. Welcome. And our trustee MC, Mark Nuccio. I'd like to welcome our trustee president, Dr. Jack Houlihan. Please wave your hand. Good to see you. Mark is responsible for envisioning the series. And let me just stop. Am I too close? I'm hearing a big feedback. Should we just turn it off?
Is that from me?
No, I'm off. I'm totally off, so there's nothing there.
You could shut it. You could shut it off.
I want to thank Mark, our trustee, for envisioning this series. Here too. All right, here we go. This is supposed to be. Oh, here we are. Thank you, Mark. He's worked very hard to identify the areas of the environment that we can use in this series, and then he helped find the perfect speakers for the programs tonight, and hence Tom Casey, our speaker. I welcome our guests who are here, and I welcome our new executive director, Caitlin Shea, who has been meeting with me this week, and so far we haven't scared her away yet.
No.
Our goals for this program are to celebrate Long Island's beautiful environment, then and now, meaning Whitman's time and now, while using multiple program activities to facilitate critical thinking about the current challenges to our environment and to provide outreach activities with each organization that comes. It's a humanities-sponsored series featuring 5 environmental events about the Pine Barrens, and in June we're having ecopoetry with an open mic for environmental poetry. We're having ecological music with Tom Chapin in July on the Whitman stage here. And our fall series includes Sustainable Foods and Farms with farmer Tom Dewey from the Young Farms and Lisa Ott, who's president of the North Shore Land Alliance. And our final program on Harbors and Bays will be in November. And we have Robert Weltner from Operation Splash, which is Stop Polluting, Littering, and Save the Harbors, and Robin Silvestri from Save the Great South Bay. So we have quite a lineup lined up, and we'll invite you all to come back again. I know you will enjoy tonight's outstanding presenter, Mr. Tom Casey, who will keep you informed of his activities for the Pine Barrens. I invite you to join the Walt Whitman Birthplace in ways that satisfy you most, to volunteer, to join, to be a donor or a sponsor. Our next poetry event is this Sunday to honor Nancy Keating, the WWBA Long Island Poet of the Year, and do join us for that. And we have a special exhibit for Mother's Day in the exhibit outside, which shows Walt's influence by the women in his life. And it's a special exhibit that our curators put together. Thank you all, and especially I want to thank New York State Parks for providing the fir tree seedlings that we have to hand out to the audience tonight. So thank you very much, and now into the forest we shall go. So Mark, would you like to come up and explain the connection between Walt Whitman and the Pine Barrens and the environment? If you would like to use the microphone. Okay.
Well, I don't think I really need it. Okay, well, Walt Whitman, born here, and I do think I see the lilacs beginning to bloom, and lilacs always symbolize the fishermen, which I have been and continue to be, the coming of the weak fish in the bay. When the lilacs bloom, the weak fish come. And for many years they were not here, but they've been coming back very strong. Now, when Walt lived here, he was a little boy, and how much he remembered of that time We don't know. He wrote a lot about it. Long Island as being his true home, you know, his true center. The reason being is that he stayed here a lot. He had a lot of relatives who loved him, and he was never afraid to mooch off of for weeks, okay? And he would wander the island. He became a schoolmaster here in many different towns, Smithtown, Syosset. He also started a paper in Huntington. He taught also in Babylon. His father had a farm there when he returned to Long Island after they had left for Brooklyn. And he hiked all over this island. He loved the beaches, the shores. He wrote a lot about that aspect of his life. But he also loved the woods and the forest and the hills and the land that was below the hills. And in that time, if you went south of this farm, you would run into the beginnings of the Pine Barrens. Pine Barrens came all the way up this way. You still find patches of it here and there. They're in Brentwood. There's still little patches in Deer Park. You can see the scrub oak and the small pines, pine. And there were thousands of acres. I'll let Tom go over that. Today, they're preserving, I don't know, about 60,000. I'm not an authority on these numbers, etc. But why we decided to do this is there is constant pushback for encroachment, trade-offs, that developers have bought pieces of it and they want to trade off for this and trade off for that. And the fear is that regardless of how it's tried to preserve, time goes by, money talks, and we want to be sure that the central, the remaining Pine Barrens remains untouched. I have hiked it many times myself and with my grandchildren. I've hiked it in the snow and went way down the trail, and it snowed and continued going. Took a picture of me in the middle of Pine Barrens and sent it to my wife, and she said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Somewhere in Pine Barrens." And she said, "Are you crazy at your age being there?" I go, "What could happen if I end up in a horizontal position? What a way to go, snowflakes, nature." So let me read some of Walt Whitman's reference to trees, the Pine Barrens, woods. When you read Leaves of Grass or any of his other many essays, you see how it comes back to the roots of him being here, and therefore symbolizing the roots of a tree. And though across the street it's not a Pine Barrens tree, you will see a tree that had to be here in his time, because the girth around it comes to about 25 feet. It's right over there. Oh, the pleasure with trees. Wonderful how trees rise and stand up with strong trunks, branches, and leaves. The slender tapering trees, the glamorous trees, the nodding, slumbering, liquid trees, clustering trees, young and old, trees in fullness of tender foliage, branching and leafing, the stalwart limbs of trees emerging, uttering joyous leaves of dark green, the growths of pine and cedar and hemlock, live oak and locust, and chestnut and hickory cottonwood, the scented bay tree, the yellow pine, the magnificent elm tree, the laurel tree with large white, last word I'm missing, the lemon and orange, the cypress, and the graceful palmetto. These are just some of the words he wrote about trees. It's about a 3-page poem called Trees. And it's interesting because he mentions the locust trees. And on Oak Island, I live in a house that goes back to 1712 during summers. And we enjoy it very much when we're not swatting mosquitoes. But the house stands on locust tree posts. They never rot. They're like iron. Okay, let me introduce Tom Casey, who's the star of this program. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll stay grounded.
There you
instead
go.
of going up there. Those of you in the back, the screen is small. You might want to move forward a little.
Yes, please, move on.
All of you.
So, just a little background here.
There's a step, be careful.
I'm on too many boards. These are some of them. I'm vice president of the Long Island Greenbelt Trail Conference, on the Pine Barrens Society, the Quogue Wildlife Refuge, Friends of Connecticut, Suffolk County Sporting Advisory Committee. I'm chair of the Pine Barrens Commission's Protected Lands Council, and out on the South Fork, part of the Coalition for Heather Woods. And I used to be on the board here, so I've been busy. So the program I'm going to do is basically about how the Pine Barrens came about, and some references to Whitman and what's ahead of us with climate change and everything. It's, who knows? So you look at a map of Long Island and you know that Long Island, as flat as it is, relatively flat, it has very interesting geological history because the Ice Age stopped smack in the middle of Long Island in what is now the Ronkonkoma Moraine. The moraine is the terminal part of the glaciers. It's as far south as they came. And you'll see the Ronkonkoma Moraine ran through the center of the island, down through the South Fork, out through Block Island, up through Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and Cape Cod. So if you go to Cape Cod for vacation, you haven't really gotten away from it all. It's the same program. And then the glaciers receded and advanced again, forming the Harbor Hill Moraine on the North Shore, and that runs to the North Fork, Plum Island, Fisher's Island, into Rhode Island, and if you've ever taken the Orient Ferry and driven through Rhode Island heading for Boston or Maine, you've noticed that it's very piney up there. It's kind of the same thing all over again. Whoops, going the wrong way. There we go. And the moraines cross in Roslyn. The Ronkonkoma Moraine comes up from the southeast. The Harbor Hill Moraine crosses it in Roslyn, and Roslyn has a hill called Harbor Hill. That's where the moraine gets its name. And West Hills is kind of where we are now, is kind of a southern extension of both of those. And in between the moraines, you see the Harbor Hill on the right side of the picture, Ronkonkoma in the center, and you can see the Peconic River coursing eastward out to Peconic Bay. And the South Shore, you notice the North Shore is a lot of cliffs and a relatively even shoreline. And the South Shore is all nets and kind of scallop shaped. That's because from the, what you call the outwash plain from the moraine was sandy. The farther south you go, the sandier it got, and the water melting from the moraine would form deltas, basically. Picture a stream. You know how streams kind of hit a curve and ultimately bust through the curve. You know, you wind up with a delta. It's like a garden hose in a driveway. You put the garden hose out, turn on the water, it goes like this. And that's basically what the outwash from the melting ice sheet did. It sprayed and formed these sandy necks that we're so famous for on Long Island. So, getting to the Pine Barrens, we think of the Pine Barrens as the land out east, but it was really part of a much larger ecosystem. This is a map that was drawn by John Cryan. He's one of the founders of the Pine Barrens Society, and to my mind, a genius of Pine Barrens. But you notice Nassau County, the southern third of Nassau County is what was the Hempstead Plains. It was a mostly treeless, tall grass prairie. It was unique. It was the easternmost prairie in the United States. Out in central Suffolk, you see the bulk of the Pine Barrens, and if you look closely, you'll notice as it peters out westward, there's a narrow band of Pine Barren, about a mile and a half wide, that runs from the Connecticut River all the way into almost where Takaportia Preserve is in Seaford. Between the Pine Barrens and the Hempstead Plains was what we call the oak brush plain. It was scrub oak, 6 to 8 feet high, scattered pitch pines. So you went from almost treeless prairie into scattered trees and tall shrubs, and finally around the Connecticut River into the Pine Barrens. Altogether, this was about 350,000 acres. Okay. Good part of Long Island. And we get a lot of place names from this. Well, first of all, I talked about the outwash plains. From the Harbor Hill Moraine on the North Shore through the central Pine Barrens, you have what's called the Terryville outwash plain. Terryville is like Port Jefferson Station. Okay? Geologists name these things for places that are nearby. So that's largely sandy soil, which promoted the growth of pitch pines. The Hempstead outwash plain is where the Hempstead Prairie was. But then you get names like Deer Park. Park, in an old sense of the word, is actually a meadow. And Deer Park was kind of an open meadow of scrub oak. You also have Plain View and Plain Edge. They were on the edge of the Hempstead Plains. You had Island Trees, Levittown now, which was kind of a grove of trees in the middle of the Hempstead Plains. Meadow Brook was a stream that ran through the meadow, the Hempstead Plains. Bay Ridge, Prospect Park, Forest Hills, the Ronkonkoma Moraine ran down through basically the Brooklyn-Queens border into Staten Island. If you drive across Staten Island, you have Toad Hill, it's all part of the moraine. And so this was a vast complex, really, and I didn't mention that dark spot out east, that's the dwarf pine plains, which we'll get to later. And Whitman, of course, referred to the whole of Long Island as Pominock, the Native American word for land of tribute. Sea beauty stretched and basking, one side by inland ocean, waving broad, with copious commerce steamers, sails, Long Island Sound, and one the Atlantic's wind caressing, fierce or gentle with mighty hulls dark gliding in the distance. Isle of sweet drinking water, healthy air and soil, isle of the earth and brine. In Whitman's time, Long Island had about 73 free-flowing streams. Some of those have dried up because of development, others have been paved over. We still have a good bunch of them. And that same poem, if you want to read it up close, go up to the top of Janes Hill, nearby here, and you'll see a plaque that the county park put up on the boulder at the top of the highest spot on Long Island. I gather the boulder was actually donated there by Frank Melville from the old Tom McCann shoe company. And it used to have a bronze plaque on it, but of course, bronze being dear, it disappeared. We tried again, that disappeared. So years ago, I approached then Park Commissioner Pete Scully and said, can you guys put a plaque up there? So he had the county park agency, or whatever they call it, that produces all the county signs. He had them print up 6 of them, so if it disappears, they'll slap it on. So the Hempstead Plains. Whitman referred to them the plains, that prairie-like and comparatively profitless expanse of land. The character of the country now becomes flat and bare of trees. The houses are far from each other, and these in an uncomfortably naked and shrubless look about them. What you're seeing in the picture is part of what's left of 30,000 or more acres of Hempstead Plains. We have a 66-acre parcel that's owned by Nassau County, and most of that is not in pristine condition. And we have a 19-acre parcel that's administered by the Friends of Hempstead Plains, and that's in a little better shape, but it's much smaller. But they're restoring prairie grasses. The prairie grasses, by the way, have little blue stem, big blue stem, Indian grass. There are stories of people riding horses through the Hempstead Plains, and you could see the rider, but not the horse. You know, that's how tall the grasses were. And part of this is natural because of the soils. Part of it was because the Native Americans would burn the grasses to encourage, it's basically a form of pruning. You know, it encouraged the growth of berry bushes and so forth. And of course, the Hempstead Plains were, in this century and even earlier, they were ripe for use and development because they didn't have to cut the trees down. You had military camps there from the Revolution forward, Revolution, Civil War, Spanish-American War, World War I. Of course, it was the cradle of aviation, and at one time you could stand in Hempstead and see the Harbor Hill Moraine near Roslyn, because there was nothing in the way. And more from Whitman, more in the middle of the island were the spreading Hempstead Plains, then meaning 1830 or 40, quite prairie-like, open, uninhabited, rather sterile, covered with kilcalf and huckleberry bushes, yet plenty fair pasture for cattle, mostly milk cows, which were fed by the hundreds, even thousands. These are pictures from the Friends of Hempstead Plains tract, the 19 acres. And the picture up top is a picture of what we call sheep laurel. He called kilcalf. It's a relative of mountain laurel that was toxic to wildlife if they ate it. Very pretty flower, though. So again, it was over 40,000 acres, really, and some of the things that you find growing there on the upper left, wild indigo. You could take the whole plant. It's got yellow flowers, but when the plant died off or you cut it, it would turn almost black. It was kind of a purple black. If you boiled it up in water and soaked cloth in it, you get a dyed cloth that was about the color of blue jeans. On the bottom left was daisy fleabane, which farmers would use to make wreaths to put around the heads of their cattle and horses. Supposedly it would drive away fleas. And on the right side is one of my favorite little plants. It's called the Deptford pink. And it's a humble little flower. They're really only about that big. But it's one of my favorite stories, really. That's a native to England. So how did it get here? And what happened is ships would come to the New World mostly for the resources we had here, particularly tall timber. You had, Europe was almost denuded of large trees by this time. And large trees, if you think about it, in those days, they were a strategic resource for tall ship masts. You can make bigger warships with taller trees, or trading ships, better still. So the ships would come here mostly empty, which means they had to have some ballast in their holds to be seaworthy. So what did they use for ballast? The dirt from their native lands. And what do you think that dirt held? Seeds, right? So places like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Charleston, all these ships came over, dumped the ballast out, and that's how some of these European plants spread. And Deptford pink from Deptford, England is one of them. Another one is a lawn pest that I'm sure many of you know, the common plantain, English plantain. That spread like crazy, and Native Americans here called it white man's foot, because everywhere the white man trod, that would spread. And then on eastward, among pine and cedar and dwarf oak, Whitman goes eastward into what we call the oak brush plain. And what's left of the oak brush plain, which was another 30,000 plus acres, we have the Oak Brush Plains Preserve run by the DEC. That's 813 acres. And there's also a small piece in Brentwood of 38 acres called the Bishop's Tract. Used to be owned by the Diocese of Brooklyn, and now it's owned by the county and the town of Iceland. The photo on the left is Old Comac Road. The preserve is on the current Comac Road, but the old two-lane concrete road is in the preserve. The pictures here are not truly representative of what the Oak Brush Plain looked like at the time, but things have grown up because of the absence of fire. But if you get into the center of it, where there's been some fire, you'll see what Whitman was talking about, where there's kind of scattered trees, an understory of scrub oak, bracken fern, a lot of low-lying, what are called heath plants. The photo on the upper right was a year or two after a pretty hot brush fire, and you see the scrub oaks growing up and the trees pretty much decimated. And you can see on the lower right, branches sprouting from the downed branch of a pine that was affected by the fire. Pitch pines are hard to kill. They have survival mechanisms that allow them to regenerate after fires. Some of the other plants you might see in this area, the upper left is dwarf chestnut oak. It's a fully grown oak tree that's about 2 feet tall. That's it. It looks like if you've ever seen a chestnut oak tree, they're in this area. It's an oak tree, but it has kind of a leaf with many rounded lobes on it. Not quite like a real chestnut, but It's reminiscent. But this one is like that, only much tinier. And the other picture is another plant that wildlife doesn't care for, American goat's rue. It's in the pea family, and goats rue the day they eat it. And here's a picture of the center of the oak brush plain after, maybe a year or two after a pretty hot brush fire. And that's sort of what created the oak brush plain, the frequency of fire that suppressed the growth of trees and created this really dense understory of scrub oak and lower plants than that. And Whitman talked about it too. He sort of did a travelogue going through Long Island. We are now in the midst of the aforementioned brush, a growth of pine and scrub oak mostly, though interspersed with birch, sumac, and other modest-sized trees. But at this time, late in autumn, it is beautiful exceedingly. We can sit and gaze admiringly for miles and miles at those colors that the chemistry of autumn has profusely dyed every leaf with. Deep and pale red, the green of the pines, the bright yellow of the hickory are the prevailing hues in numberless lovely combinations. We have often thought that those who make designs for carpets could get most excellent hints from these autumn garnishings. How pleasing and grateful would be a carpet pattern richly covered with figures and colors, closely imitated from what one sees here. How much better than the tasteless, meaningless, in every way unartistical diagrams that we walk over now in the most fashionably carpeted parlors. Great description.
We have no opinions.
I highlighted the words birch and hickory. In Whitman's time, those were common in that area. Birch is now uncommon on Long Island. Why? Because Long Island is warmer. It's partly because of climate change, partly because of suburbia. You know, we build houses, we build roads, we build industrial buildings. They all act as heat sinks. So our temperatures, our average temperatures have gone on just enough to drive out, what do we do here? I've been hitting the button. To drive out species that were borderline not thriving here anyway. And hickory, we have hickories on Long Island, but not really in the oak brush plains. What has moved in though are big tooth aspen, which basically has been wind blown from the west. Everything's in constant flux, really. But you know, talk about the Berber carpet. Here's a shot in autumn of, you know, you can see the colors here. And you know, absent the hickory, now you have the big tooth aspen. They turn a bright yellow. So there's another layer of color. So finally, along around Connecticut Park, the oak brush plains, the trees get more frequent and thicker and taller. And by the time you're in Connecticut State Park, you're in the Pine Barrens. From there on east, okay? And this is in Connecticut Park. That's the clubhouse of the old South Side Sportsman's Club. This is open for tours now on Sundays, mostly in season 3.
First and third.
First and third Sundays. My wife Sherry is one of the people who offers the tours. And the path going past the clubhouse is actually the original Montauk Highway. This became a sportsman's club in the 1860s. Wealthy New York bankers, industrialists, politicians, you name it. And ultimately they didn't like the hoi polloi coming past their clubhouse, so they had Montauk Highway moved farther south. And also nearby the clubhouse is the Nichols Mill, which dates to the early 1700s. And you can see a pile of daffodils right now if you hurry up and go there this weekend. These are shots of the Connecticut River. It's a quite famous trout stream, pure water. And this brings us to the question of why barren? Why are the Pine Barrens called barren? Right? And first of all, they're not all pine. It's a bit of a misnomer. You either have a pine oak barren or an oak pine barren, depending on which dominates. And that has to do with the frequency of fire. If there's a higher fire frequency, you'll get more pines. If there hasn't been a fire in 60, 70 years, you'll find more oaks. But what grows in the Pine Barrens are the pitch pine, scarlet, white, black, and scrub oaks, so-called heath plants, blueberry, huckleberry, sweet fern, bracken fern, wintergreen, and so forth. We have wetlands that hold the largest concentration of endangered species in New York, and the soils are mostly sandy, acidic, almost as acidic as lemon juice in some places, desert-like. The water drains right through, so a lot of these plants are adapted to grow. They have leathery leaves, they don't need much moisture, and they thrive even in a high fire cycle. Some of the plants you'll see, on the upper left is white oak, which has the rounded low leaves that look like the Nature Conservancy symbol. Next to that, the scarlet oak with the pointy leaves, the most common oak, I would say. Lower right is what you'll find along streams called, it's Clethra alnifolia is the Latin name. It's called Indian soapbush or sweet pepper bush. It has seed pods that look like peppercorns, and if you take the flowers and moisten them up, you get a nice fragrant lather. And the last one on the lower left is sweet fern, which is not a fern, it's a woody stem plant, but if you take the leaves and crush them up, it's very fragrant. I used to take high school kids on hikes in the woods, and they'd see that and they'd get all excited. They thought it was pot. But, had to disappoint them. And bracken fern, which is, most ferns are wetland plants. Bracken fern is an upland, dryland plant that's almost universal in the world. And the lower one is bearberry. Maybe bears like it. It's not poisonous, but it's not palatable really. But that grows in the poorest, driest soils in the Pine Barrens. And then you get other things. The top left is a flower I love. It's called World, W-H-O-R-L-E-D, World loosestrife. It looks like sort of like a pagoda. You get a stem with 4 leaves coming off the stem, and at the base of the leaves you get 4 flowers coming out. And the stem goes up, you get another layer. Stem goes up, you get another layer. It's fleeting but a very beautiful flower. Upper right is wintergreen with the red berries that taste like a wintergreen lifesaver. The yellow flower is Pine Barrens heather, and on the lower left is pixie cup moss, a very tiny little moss that grows in the colder regions of the Pine Barrens. And some of the wildlife, box turtles, painted turtles, and Fowler's toads. Fowler's toads, you can walk through the Pine Barrens and not see them because, well, they see you, but they're great at camouflage. You know, if you approach them, you notice they're pretty much the color of their background, and they will stay stock still. So you'll walk by and you won't notice them. If you do notice them, if you get close, they'll still, I'm not here, they'll just stay put. But if you manage to pick one up, then they'll pee in your hand. So that's their defense mechanism. Also, depending on where they are in the Pine Barrens, they're not like camellias, they don't change color, but If they grow in the drier, if they live in the drier regions of the Pine Barrens, they'll tend to be lighter in color. If they're in wetter areas where the soils are darker, they'll tend to be darker in color. They tend to adapt to their surroundings. Other things that you'll find in there: deer, turkey, red fox, and of course the tick. These are not in proportion, don't panic. But the tick in the picture is a Lone Star tick, so named for the white dot on the back. It's a concern, you know, we have Lyme disease. I always tell people, you know, we've been hiking on Long Island since the 70s, and so far so good. And I always tell people, take precautions, be aware but not paranoid. You know, they're out there, use repellent, check yourself frequently, especially after a hike, and it should be okay. And then we come to some of the avian life in there. This is the hermit thrush. Whitman wrote about the hermit thrush, mourning Lincoln's loss, and what he said: in the swamp and secluded recesses, a shy and hidden bird is warbling a song. Solitary the thrush, the hermit withdrawn to himself, avoiding the settlements, singing by himself a song. Song of the bleeding throat, death's outlet, song of life. For well, dear brother, I know, if thou wast not granted to sing, thou wouldst surely die. And being a sort of novice with PowerPoint, I couldn't get the audio on the presentation, but let's see if I can bring up a hermit thrush song for you. That's the hermit thrush. Okay. Hey, go away. And Mark mentioned the central Pine Barrens. What's preserved so far? This is a map of the protected area. The green is what's called the core preservation area. These are places that can no longer be built on. It's not total wilderness. There are places in there that have existing built on properties, but it's mostly empty. The tan area is the compatible growth area where development is still possible, but with some restrictions as to the percentage of the land you can use, and there are sewage restrictions, other restrictions on it. So right now, it's actually up to about 106,000 acres that have been preserved out of, say, 250,000 original acres of Pine Barrens. And we're pretty much built out now. This is, there are a couple of smaller properties that we're still trying to preserve, but basically this is it. You know, we've saved as much as we can. And the principal reason for this is our groundwater. You know, this is where Long Island's drinking water comes from. You ask the majority of people on Long Island, where does your tap water come from? A lot of them will say New York City. They think they're from upstate reservoirs. They think we're connected to the city system. No, it's coming from down below, and we have to preserve that. So that's really the impetus for why we had this ages-old fight to save it, largely successful. And then we get to the fact that the Pine Barrens are changing. It's like right now we're being assaulted with different pests like the southern pine beetle, and it's like, well, you know, if the vegetation of the Pine Barrens is destroyed, what's the point of saving it? Why don't we build on it? Well, because of the groundwater. You know, we do need to save that. These pictures show you what happens in Pine Barrens. Look at the difference in the canopy in these two pictures. The one on the left hasn't had a fire in decades, 60, 70, probably 80 years. Turn around from the same spot and look north, and there's a spot that had a fairly hot brush fire. That picture was actually taken in the 1980s, and things have grown up since, but it just shows you the difference. When fire comes through, it opens up the canopy, but things grow back. The pitch pines, the scrub oak, you almost can't kill them. The great wildfire of 1995, it went from, Suffolk Community College in Riverhead down to West Hampton. There was a lesser fire in Rocky Point Preserve. At one point, like the upper right picture, the fire line was 6 miles wide as it pushed southward toward West Hampton. And you could see after the fire, there wasn't a green needle left in some of these places. And a month later, on the upper left, you could see sprouts from a totally denuded tree. You could see sprouts coming from the bases of the trees because the pitch pines have a lot of stored energy in underground roots, and bingo, there it goes. 3 months later, the upper right, you had scrub oaks coming up. A year later, it was pretty much filled in. You started to see some scattered taller bushes. By 2013, it looks like this. And if you go there now, it's still fairly tall, but those are pictures from what we call the dwarf pine plains, and those trees never will get too tall. There's a reason for that, but it gets complicated. But then we had another large fire in 2012. We call it the Crescent Bow Fire. Crescent Bow is a street and ridge where the fire started. We believe it was set. I don't know why or who. But this was kind of interesting. Down in the bottom of the screen, that was the hottest part of the fire where most everything got burned. But toward the east end of the fire, as it petered out, this is what we call a Promenade Path. It's a hiking trail from Rocky Point to Shinnecock. And the trail here, the fire just kind of burned lightly through there. And the trail itself was compacted from foot traffic. So it was about 2-3 inches below the surface surrounding the trail. And as the fire swept through, what happens? Heat rises. So it didn't burn the trail, it burned everything around it. So after the fire, we looked at that, and it was like this brown ribbon going through a sea of black. It was really fascinating. And by 2014, again, you see the understory coming back. The Pine Barrens have a remarkable ability to regenerate themselves and drive out competing species. It's why you don't see poison ivy in the Pine Barrens. Poison ivy is not tolerant of fire. So they need fire to survive and drive out competing species. I could have saved my voice. Let's see. Come on, there we go. And it's like a pruning mechanism. Come on, one more. Oh, and it adds ash to the soil for nutrition. Knew there was something else. And out east, a conglomeration of the Atlantic coastal plain ponds. This is where you find this large concentration of endangered species, most of which, I'm sorry to say, I wouldn't know if I fell over them. Mostly inconspicuous little grasses and flowers. But the the east end of the Pine Barrens, near the Peconic River, is shot full of little ponds that are just marvelous places. And these are shots around Maple Swamp and Owl Pond, which are accessible by our Promenade Path hiking trail. The lower left picture I find interesting. That's an old remnant. There aren't very many left now. This is, you know, the Pine Barrens are kind of featureless, and landowners in the old days would mark their property in two ways. One would be a ditch and mound. You dig a ditch, pile the soil on one side, and you've got a property line. Another way would be to take a row of mostly oak trees, saplings, bend them over, put a log on top, and you know, the tree would bend over, and then as it sought the sun, it would turn upward, and you'd get this L-shaped thing. And you do a whole line of those. It's almost like a fence line. With the advent of barbed wire, they stopped doing that, and most of these have died out. This is my little shop of horrors picture. These are all insect-eating plants. The ones on the right are yellow and purple bladderwort. Terrible name, bladderwort. But they have underwater sacs that eat underwater insects, and the one on the left is sundew. Those dewdrops are actually a digestive juice. So little gnats or flies that land on it get stuck and don't ever come back. And these plants are an adaptation to the most nutrient poor part of the Pine Barrens. So they've got to get their protein somewhere. And other plants, again, the barrens are not barren, but you have to be quick to see some of these. Slender yellow-eyed grass and meadow beauty are two uncommon flowers that you can find if you look closely. White fringed orchids and rose begonia orchids. Long Island used to have dozens of orchid species, most of which have died because of lack of habitat anymore. And this is pitcher plant, relative of Venus flytrap. The pitchers on the right have downward facing hairs in them, and insects go in there seeking what they think is nectar, and again, it's digestive juice, and the hairs keep them from coming back out. And the flowers are on tall stalks so that they can be pollinated, and the pollinators don't get caught in the plant. That's the plant's way of thanking the pollinators by keeping them above the fray. And I like this one. It's called swamp candle. It's a relative of loosestrife, but it's a pretty yellow flower. And arrowhead or duck potato has an underwater tuber that Native Americans used as a starch. And finally, out in Flanders, the Pine Barrens meet the bay. You see places out there with big patches of prickly pear cactus, which is native to Long Island, but again, we've driven out most of its habitat. You get these beautiful marshlands of spartina grasses and juncus grass and glasswort and all sorts of wonderful things. And the dwarf pine plains, this is a small, globally rare area north of West Hampton. If you've driven out Sunrise Highway through exit 63, that's kind of the center of it. You'll notice the trees, especially on the south side, very short. And the bird in this one, got another serenade for you. This is a prairie warbler. And to my mind, it sounds like a jet engine warming up. You know, it just gets higher and higher. But let's see if we can do a prairie warbler for you. they tend to sit at the top of these dwarf pines, which basically go 6 to 8 feet, and they're actually the same species as the taller pitch pines, but because they're in the poorest soils and a higher fire frequency, they never get that big. And it's a bowl about 2 miles wide, and as you get towards the edge, the trees gradually hit more nutritious soil and get bigger and bigger. So it is a globally rare area, and you see a scrub oak leaves with a buckmoth caterpillar. Buckmoth is a pretty moth, white, black, and orange. If you go out to the dwarf pines in October on a sunny afternoon, you might see hundreds of them flying around. And here again, just to give you the sense of scale here, there's a hike going through the dwarf pines, very harsh environment in the summer, and you see how short all the trees are. And then, the ever-changing pine barrens. What's eating the pine barrens? In 2010, we had a big attack on the oak trees out in Flanders. It was kind of a triple whammy. The tiger-striped oakworm caterpillar that you see, gypsy moths, and an armillaria root fungus. And in about a year and a half, in a big patch of the Flanders Pine Barrens, all the oaks died. It was just amazing. You can see the lower right how sparse everything became. And by 2011, you could see what's happening. Absent the oaks shading everything out, pitch pines moved in like crazy. And by 3 years, they're getting taller and taller. There's Owl Pond. Yeah, you can see just the progression. Nothing stays the same. And now, probably the worst attack we've had is this tiny little thing about the size of a grain of rice called the southern pine beetle, which has destroyed thousands, tens of thousands of trees in the Pine Barrens. And again, there's Uncle Ben's. It's the size of a grain of rice. And it burrows under the bark and creates these crazy patterns that look like a Jackson Pollock painting, and it cuts off the circulation of the tree. And you know you have it if you look at a pitch pine and see these resin globs that are oozing out. Arborists call them popcorn. And it goes all the way up the tree. It's a pitch pine, when the pine beetle burrows in, the pitch pine will try to eject it by pushing out with the sap. But if there are too many beetles, then it overwhelms the tree, and it can kill a tree in 3-4 weeks. And you see this sweeping through the Pine Barrens. There's the underside of the bark. That's what it looks like, and you see all the entry holes from the southern pine beetle. It's just nuts. And there is no cure, really. And you see that the canopy will turn brown, and then the whole tree will die. And the map, a little tough to see on the bottom, but the hardest hit areas tend to be out east in the Pine Barrens. It will go after pitch pine, white pine, mostly any pine, really. And the only thing it can do is cut down the affected trees and ideally cut down a swath of healthy trees around it so that the beetles don't spread. This was a picture from Connecticut Park where they had to destroy a whole area. Same thing is happening now in Quogue Wildlife Refuge out in Quogue, which is one of my favorite places. So it's disheartening at first. Lakeland County Park in Islandia, virtually all of the pines were dead. The green you see there are other species. But, you know, things grow in their place. Once the trees are gone, the canopy opens, you're gonna get scrub oak, you're going to get denser berry bushes. You know, things will change. It's not like it's going to be a desert. But now we're also faced with climate change, which is upon us more rapidly than anyone expected. The Earth's average temperature has risen an average of 2 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. And the rate is, since 1981, is more than twice as fast, the average growth. The 10 warmest years in the historical record have all occurred since 2010. And it's not getting better. The last colder than average year was 1976. And this is a picture of a glacier in Antarctica, Thwaites Glacier, which is enormous. If it slides into the sea, sea levels will rise 25 inches. Think of what that might do to the South Shore. And you can see in this picture, again, things have changed over time. You notice the Ice Age coastline on the right. New York's coastline, Long Island's coastline, in the Ice Age was 150 miles south of where it is. When the ice melted, you know, we moved up to where we are now. But now that the ice caps and the glaciers are melting, we may lose a good part of the South Shore. We may lose Florida. We may lose a lot of places. In 2021, NASA said we could expect an increase of flooding for Long Island in the late 2020s, more sunny day flooding. In other words, no storms, just average tides will cause more flooding. I think I picked the wrong color for this, I can't read it. And the moon has a cycle that is coming into a cycle that will make the tides higher for several years. They predict a period of relative stability till the 2040s, and then after the 2040s, sea level rise, stronger storms with heavier rainfall, storm surges, 100-year storms that take place every 15 years. And we're starting really to see that already. And they're predicting by the end of the 21st century a sea level increase of about 3.2 feet. And I question about, you know, haven't we gotten well on our way there? These two pictures are from Islip. It's Montauk, the McDonald's on Montauk Highway in Islip on the right side, and Bayview Avenue on the south side. And these things will happen more and more. And globally, half the species in the world are on the move. Species that grew in more southern climes are heading north. Species that grew in lower altitudes are heading up. You've got, and they move at different rates. Something like a dandelion flower, you go puff on it and it spreads like crazy. The seeds in the middle, the winged seeds, are from a pitch pine. They can helicopter out for a number of yards. Oaks, the acorns kind of drop. So they're going to creep at a much, much slower rate. Then you get to the next pest of the month, the southern lantern, the spotted lanternfly, which is moving eastward on Long Island already. There we go, land species, 10 or more miles a decade. Marine species naturally can move faster than that. Atlantic cod can move over 125 miles in 1 decade. And you know, the heavier the sea, the slower the migration. And now, the spotted lanternfly, which is an extremely serious thing because it can affect vineyards. You know?
This is serious.
This is serious for a number of us. And forests, of course, you see 1960 to 1990, and then 2070 to 2100. Not going to get into the species, but you'll see the migration of trees northward, and again, something will be here, but it's not what we're used to. And then you get another complication, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current, which I don't know why scientists have to come up with these complicated names. We call it the Gulf Stream. Thank you. Yes. And what happens is, with the melting of the ice sheets, that's dumping more fresh water into the ocean. That reduces the density and salinity of the water at the north end of the Gulf Stream. So that inhibits how quickly the water can sink and keep the circulation going. And it weakens the overall flow. So it's now moving slower than it has in thousands of years. It's on pace to pass a tipping point by 2100 where it just stops. And you'll have rising sea levels along the coast of North America and northwestern Europe. England will have another ice age. You'll get more heat waves and cyclones in this country. The Northeast is projected to actually be colder, and much of Europe will be colder. And this is starting now. I mean, if we don't make some changes, then it might be too late by now. Who knows? So change is constant. It's happening at a quicker pace. Earth has always healed itself, but will it continue to do so? We don't know. And I'd like to end, which has only a tenuous connection to the nature, but I think it's a great quote from Whitman. Democracy, most of all, affiliates with the open air, is sunny and hardy and sane only with nature, just as much as art is. Something is required to temper both, to check them, restrain them from excess, morbidity. I have wanted, before departure, to bear special testimony to a very old lesson and requisite. American democracy, in its myriad personalities, in factories, workshops, stores, offices, through the dense streets and houses of cities, and all their manifold, sophisticated life, must either be fibered, vitalized by regular contact with outdoor light and air and growths, farm scenes, animals, fields, trees, birds, sun warmth and free skies, or it will certainly dwindle and pale. We cannot have grand races of mechanics, work people, and commonality, the only specific purpose of America, commonality, on any less terms. I conceive of no flourishing and heroic elements of democracy in the United States, or of democracy maintaining itself at all, without the nature element forming a main part, to be its health element and beauty element, to really underlie the whole politics, sanity, religion, and art of the New World. I think it's a pretty apt quote for these times we're in, these crazy times. And I'll leave you with that. Okay.
Thank you, Tom. That was magnificent. And a new way to look at the Pine Barrens. I thought it was just pines out there.
Yeah.
So all that wonderful nature and the insects and the birds. So thank you very much. We appreciate that. And we do want to have some Q&A, but before we do that, we have our musician here, Linda Sussman, and she has some ecological songs. Poems, perhaps that they began as poems, but that she will sing a few songs for us tonight before we have our conversation.
Thank you, and I have to say that was quite educational. That was really fabulous. Thank you.
Let's see if I can turn the heat up.
So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm actually going to share 3 original songs. This first one I wrote quite some time ago. Is this on?
Yeah.
I did write a long time ago, and I resurrected it recently because of all that's going on and, you know, our concerns of climate change and just trying to get people, because I have been singing this in other places, trying to get people to really think about how their actions are affecting the environment and everything around us. That's too loud, isn't it? So this is called Mother Earth. Man in the moon with a smiling eyes confers with the stars in Father Sky. While Mother Earth holds her hand out, singing watch, 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 where you going? We brought our plows and dug in deep. We planted steel and mounds of heat. While Mother Earth holds her hands out, singing watch, 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 oh watch, 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 where you going? And we changed the rain, and we shifted snow. We warmed the land, oh, a deep red glow. While Mother Earth holds her hands out, singing watch, 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 oh watch, 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 where you going? And we crossed the wires, we crossed the line, called it progress, the song of time. While Mother Earth holds her hands out, singing watch, 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 where you going? The man in the moon with the smiling eyes And this next song is called Pass It On Down. And the inspiration for this song was my brother-in-law. And my sister and brother-in-law live up in Vermont, and he grew up on 800 acres on some mountain up there, up in the Northeast Kingdom. And he is an avid vegetable gardener. I mean, we're talking, you know, acres and acres and acres. And I remember the first time that Emmy and I went up to visit after they got married, and we approached the house, and laid out in their driveway were these tarps, just like numerous tarps, and on them were potatoes that he had dug like that day, and he was getting ready to brush and clean and have them dry, and it just really made an impression on me, just seeing how he cared for the land. And I think I was overwhelmed by the volume because he can really feed the whole town. And they, you know, they do a lot of canning and all that stuff, but it was really his caretaking of the land that they lived on. And so it got me thinking and to write this song, and it really is about being good stewards of our planet and passing all of that down to the next generations. Oh, you live a good life, and you pass it on down. Hands on the wheel, your feet on the ground. Rise before sun up and work until dusk. Provide for your family, life born of love. Many times you have tried, many ways you have failed to carry your stories along decades of trails. All the homes you have lived in the hills that you've sown, you dig deep for the memories of all you have known. Oh, you live a good life, and you pass it on down. Hands on the wheel, feet on the ground. Rise before sun up and work until dusk. Provide for your family, life born of and this is kind of interesting. I do a lot of blues. I write a lot of blues, but this is talking blues, which I really don't do, but I'm going to do for you. And it started, songs, as a songwriter, we've seen our songs morph over time. We write them with certain intentions, with certain meanings, and sometimes it kind of shifts. As the years go on, it takes on, it morphs into a new meaning that you really, is a little stretch from why you wrote it. So, I will say about this song, started out, God, so long ago, I won't even say how long ago, but it started out and it was called Terry in the Bathtub. Something about shaving and, women and feminism, and then it morphed. And it morphed into a song I wrote for a gig I did out east, and the theme of that whole day was living on Long Island. So I'm like, how can I change this for that? So I've now adapted it for this here event. So hang with me, we'll get there, is what I'm saying. And it's no longer called Terry in the Bathtub, it's called Long Island Maid. And M-A-D-E, not M-A-I-D. Well, a few years ago, and by a few, I mean 30, Queens was my den, the city my flair. It was love and youth brought me way out here. I was headed for change, surrounded by water, two shores a middle, unclear about the borders. Make the island my home, embrace a whole new hood. No concrete jungle, no circling for a spot. No smells of garbage wafting up from whatnot. There was open space on the island of Long. Well, I packed my Datsun, fit my life in my car. This whole new dimension was a bit bizarre. My fingers white knuckling, never driven so far. I settled in Seacliff, a quaint beachy town. Artists and musicians just 2 blocks from the sound. Was it a perfect match? My new stomping grounds. No concrete jungle, no circling for a spot. No smells of garbage wafting up from whatnot. It was a delicate balance on the island of Long. Well, it's a funny story. You see, the house I had rented is next door to a bar with a late rowdy crowd. Their ruckus of grief came as a comfort to me. I found boardwalks, art walks, Pine Barrens and more. Trails and birding, my preferred outdoors. On this spit of land with its pristine aquifers. No concrete jungle, no circling for a spot. No smells of garbage wafting up from whatnot. As time would have it, I found a new pace. Even yearned for more quiet and more open space. My city edge had all but gone up in flames. No, I don't miss the concrete or circling for a spot, or the smells of garbage wafting up from whatnot. It's been a good trade now on Long Island Maid. Thank you.
That was great. I don't know if we have any conversation that we want to about the Pine Barrens or any questions we have about Tom, or for Tom, I should say. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful evening. And thank you again, Mark, for putting the program together. And thank you, Tom, for coming out and giving us that wonderful presentation about the Pine Barrens. And Linda, thank you very much. I thank all of you for coming, and watch our website for our next in series. Thank you very much.